post-pandemic will indeed be a very different era, in good measure because of the confluence of a number of major shocks. The pandemic itself, of course, is the big one, but we also have the various elements of the digital transformation that have been building up and creating pressure on economies. We have the steep intensification of climate change related concerns with the massive forest fires in Australia and the United States West. We also have the populist reactions to the perceived excesses of globalization, which have been driving political dynamics, including, of course, the election of President Trump himself back in 2017. And of course, we have the trade and technology war between the United States and China. So all these things are coming together and they're forcing change. What's more, because of the pandemic, we have seen an acceleration in the change of business models, work from home and so forth. And this has had a tremendous effect on different businesses. Some have prospered and their values, market values have soared. Others have been forced to close. In many ways, this is creative destruction in the sense that we're seeing the transformation of the global economy in response to the digital possibility or to the possibilities of the digital transformation. But in many ways, it's also destructive destruction. We're seeing the loss of firms that would otherwise be viable but could not survive the combination of the pandemic, economic shocks and others. So there will be permanent scars in that sense. When you lose firms, you lose trade. Meanwhile, both China and the United States have actually limited room to maneuver on trade. The US election results will change the tone of the administration, but they do not signal an end to populism per se. President Trump, after all, gained the second highest vote total in US electoral history. Meanwhile, China has no option but to try and break the US stranglehold on critical technologies. And that does dictate domestically focused industrial policy. So those two major trends will continue. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, you have Brexit is coming ready or not, and that is going to cause fairly major shock waves in the European area. So there are many factors driving change, and it will not go away. But that being said, while all these things point to forces that are driving apart the world and forcing it towards isolationism and so forth, and a reduction of trade, we're also seeing many countercurrents as well. And I'll give you a few examples. The US, for example, will be rejoining international organizations. So that will be a positive factor for the global community. And we also have, surprisingly, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement that has been under negotiation for the better part of a decade, and which includes China and 14 regional economies, including the ASEAN members. This is supposed to be signed this coming week at a virtual leaders meeting, and this is according to reports out of Indonesia. So that goes against the sense of dissension and disruption. And notwithstanding all the talk of decoupling, foreign direct investment to China has held up, and Chinese firms continue to list on US stock exchanges. So it seems that businesses are not actually validating all this geopolitical trash talk that we're hearing from governments. So in my sense that there's the world will continue to be shaped by the contest for the major new and contestable economic rents that are to be found in a nexus of big data, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. And also it will continue to be shaped by the newfound national security and sovereignty concerns that are raised by the digital transformation. So I've written that we have gone from the end of history to the fire hose of history. But curiously, we do need a bit more history to see exactly how this conflict will turn out before we know the future shape of globalization. In this particular case, geography matters very much. Trade patterns are shaped heavily by economic geography, both distance, but also patterns of comparative advantage, cultural affinities, and so forth. So ASEAN is firmly rooted in this Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific world in which China is a very major part. So from this perspective, the deep and intricate trade relations in the West Pacific that have underpinned the Asian miracle over the past few decades, this will continue regardless of policy choices made in capitals. Ultimately, as I mentioned, it is firms that trade, not states, and they will continue to exploit the market opportunities. ASEAN also has individual FTAs with all the major economies in the region. The RCEP from ASEAN's perspective is mainly about streamlining the spaghetti bowl of rules. So it's really about economics rather than politics. And it's good economics because it does reduce trade costs. And from ASEAN's perspective, India's withdrawal from the RCEP negotiations actually represents economic gains foregone, and it kind of weakens the overall Indo-Pacific economic sphere. But in terms of what Canada can do to help ASEAN with its trade diversification objectives. And trade diversification, by the way, is always a good thing from a risk hedging perspective, and doubly so when it's achieved not by putting up barriers, but by reducing barriers to trade. So ASEAN could, of course, pursue trade agreements with the European Union, the United States, and Canada. These are all open up for grabs, and they would all work naturally to help its trade diversification. So one way that Canada could support ASEAN would be simply to pursue an FTA with ASEAN. We have actually written in favor, advocating that for Canada and for ASEAN through various think tanks. More generally, ASEAN and Canada, both small, open economies, and as such, we have a joint and mutual interest in seeing the multilateral rules-based system strengthened and its rules observed. So working together to make the WTO fit for the purpose for the digital age would be a second way in which Canada and ASEAN can usefully cooperate and strengthen, again, the system which protects us all from coercive behavior by the great powers. Canada joining the Digital Economic Partnership Agreement, the DEPA, which has been established by Singapore, New Zealand, and Chile, would be one way in which Canada could deepen its engagement with the region in working out the rules of the road for the digital age. And notably, having small open economies like ourselves working together on these rules seems to be much more desirable than having the rules set by the large hegemonic players. So I think there are lots of ways that Canada can help ASEAN in its future trade relations, but we do have to engage in the region and engage in a big way.